This episode is brought to you by Puma Running.
I'm really after a new race day shoe. Can you tell me a bit more about the Puma Fast R2?
The Puma Fast R2 are my favourite race day shoe. Now, I ran in these for Chicago Marathon, and I definitely think they helped me on my way to a 4-minute PB where I ran 2:23, just because they save your legs so much, which is obviously very helpful for marathon running.
What do you think makes them so special?
Two things I think really make the difference. Firstly, this carbon plate that you can see extends right beyond the forefoot. That just gives you an extra spring on each step, really propels you forward. Secondly, the nitro foam. This is nitrogen infused foam, which gives you maximum cushioning and maximum energy return. So that means you are more efficient each stride and can essentially run faster for longer.
Okay, I'm sold.
Well, I have great news for our 5 Miles Easy UK listeners. We have a very special discount code for Puma Running. Enter 5ME20 at Puma Running to get 20% off.
So when she passed away, and then my best friend shortly after, I actually suffered from depression, anxiety and OCD, and it got to the point where I was going to take my own life, and came back from therapy and was just like, right, I'm going to give running a go, like see what happens. And I ran for about an hour, not very far at all, because most of the time I was stopping, but all of a sudden I was connected to Mum and Will, and I was like, I think I've found my therapy. And we actually offer a beat your goal guarantee. So if you hit 80% or more of your sessions and you don't run your goal, we'll give you a full refund.
Don't panic. And I think one of the biggest mistakes people make, especially we talked about this 2-week window now, is runners do not panic. This is not the window to go and do something to prove to yourself that you are fit enough to run the marathon.
We know that a lot of our listeners are getting ready for spring marathons over the next few weeks. So on today's show, we have not one, but 2 marathon experts.
We're going to be joined by Pete Coopah, the founder of the app Coopah, which is the official training app for the London Marathon. We're also joined by James Thie, who is the head coach of the app and Pete's own coach too. We're going to be hearing about why Pete started Coopah back in 2020, how the Coopah app can help with your training goals, and getting plenty of London Marathon training tips from James.
Rose, so we have plenty of marathon experience and we know what works for us in training. So why do you still need a coach?
So many people ask me this. And honestly, I could probably write a program for myself. I've done quite a few marathon training blocks. I kind of know what works, but I could not do it without a coach. I think a big part of it is just having someone to hold me accountable. And I don't necessarily mean someone to get me out of the door, because running is such a big part of my life. And generally that's not the aspect I struggle with, but it's more holding me accountable to the results of sessions and keeping it in perspective, especially when they don't quite meet my expectations, which, let's be honest, during a marathon build-up happens quite frequently. You get tired, that's all part of it, and you always have sessions that either don't feel as easy as you think they're going to, or you're not hitting the paces for whatever reason. And I think having someone to go back to after that session and say, I felt really tired, my legs felt terrible, and often my coach says, well, that's how I expected you to feel. And that just changes my whole mindset and perspective on what I've done. And I think, okay, well, actually, that's fine. And I can move forward and I don't get hung up on it. Whereas if I didn't have that person, I think I would often fall into the rabbit hole of thinking every session has to be perfect. And if it doesn't go well, then I'll overthink it and worry about it.
Yeah, and just remembering the purpose of the session, because sometimes what I'll do is, say I have 1K reps, for example. In my head, I kind of know the pace I could go if I was doing it as a speed session where you're meant to be going really fast. But then sometimes the purpose of the session isn't that, and you're going to be going into it tired. And actually you have to adjust it where those 1K reps are going to be slower, but you kind of compare the times and you think, oh, but I know I can run 1K in this time. Why was this session slower? So just reminding yourself, like, your coach will give you the reason that he set that session.
Yeah, exactly. And taking it in the context of the whole plan. You can't just have an A-star session every single day because you'll get burnt out. So you've got to think about it in the context of the whole plan, which I think is so much easier for a coach to do from an objective perspective than us, even though we've done lots of marathon training blocks. What about some top marathon tips, things that you've learned over your various build-ups, what are the key things that you've either changed or learnt the hard way or found have really helped you progress?
I've had a few marathon builds now, and I think it's really good to remind yourself that everyone is different. So you really do have to work out what works best for you. So in your first marathon build, you're going to maybe follow a plan, and then you can kind of assess like, I enjoyed this, I didn't enjoy that, this worked, this didn't. And then it's great as you do more and more, you just get more experience and you know what works. I think for me, in terms of mistakes, I've been guilty of trying to prove to myself that I'm fit and really like hammering some sessions and being really happy with the outcome of the sessions, thinking, what a great confidence boost, which is great, but it's finding the right balance, because you don't want to be going way too hard on some of those later long sessions when you've got your marathon in less than a month, because you need to make sure you're peaking for the race. So I think, again, in terms of having a coach, just what helps me is just holding me back a little bit and being like, actually, you don't need to be like smashing these splits. Like, if you go a bit slower, it doesn't mean you're any more unfit. It's going to be saving your legs for the race day. So I think that's actually the main one for me, is in these later stages, just holding back a bit.
I think confidence is such a crucial word there. And that's something that is a lot easier to have confidence in if you've got someone doing your plan and taking that thinking out of it. And then you don't doubt what you're doing. And you can have confidence in your training without having to go out and test it and prove to yourself that it's working throughout the build up.
Yeah, and that's really why I have a coach, because it's having someone to just rein me in a little bit and say like, Steph, you don't need to do the same mileage you did last week. Like, just cut out this run. Let's do a bit less. Let's adjust this session a bit, because you might have a session on the plan and I would still stick to that exact same session if I'd written it. Whereas then my coach might be like, you know what, actually you've been feeling a bit tired. Let's adjust this session, reduce the number of reps or whatever, just because he's listening to how I'm feeling, and I kind of need someone to give me the permission to do less. And once he says do less or have a rest day or whatever, I'm like, okay, I'm allowed to do that now. Whereas if it was just me, I'd be like, oh, am I kind of just, I don't know, being a bit lazy or just giving up and I'm not like following the plan. It's nice to have someone say, no, this is the right thing to do. And then you're like, okay, I can do it that way.
Yeah, I can relate to that as well. I think having someone to hold me back is something that I definitely lean on my coach for, but also something I've learned throughout the marathon blocks, that it's okay to take it down a bit, and you're not going to suddenly lose fitness if 1 week you're feeling tired and run 10 less miles. That's mistakes. I mean, I've made so many mistakes in marathon build-ups. And one of the biggest things I've learned over the last few is to focus on consistency rather than smashing sessions. Yeah. And actually, if I can just every week get in some good work, then it doesn't matter if one session I don't hit my splits. It's fine. And to not get hung up on it. I think I've just really learned the power of consistency and doing everything at 70-80%. And achieving 78% of the sessions, and that is a way better outcome than trying to hit 100%, which inevitably could well tip you over the edge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a good reminder is marathon training is all about learning to run on tired legs, because a marathon is such a long way. So at some point in the second half of that race, like, your legs are going to feel sore, tired. So all those training sessions you're doing is just, you're going to be running on tired legs. So like you say, adjusting your expectations of the outcome and just going to more of a feel or effort, knowing you're working hard, but not worrying so much about the pace. So then what do you struggle with the most during marathon training?
Patience. I think that's what I struggle with most. And it's always at the start of the marathon block. Towards the end of the marathon block, when I'm in that big peak mileage, bigger sessions week, I almost find that the easier bit, because I feel like I'm doing the work that I need to get to the race. But you've also got to do a lot before that chunk, which is not so marathon specific, which isn't as big. And you can't do it all. You can't run that mileage and do those huge sessions throughout the whole block. But I always get really impatient and I want to get to that big work phase, I think, to prove to myself that I can do it, which kind of leads back to our point earlier about having confidence of the plan and not rushing it, not trying to prove it to yourself all the time, because that's not going to get you the best result. But yeah, just having patience and building up slowly, I think, is the thing I struggle with most.
Yeah, not overdoing it at the start and feeling like you need to put in all these like really long runs just to know you can run that far, because you've done it before. You know your body can do the long runs when it needs to.
Exactly. What about you?
I think the hardest bit for me is when it comes to the taper, and it's kind of a weird one because I almost look forward to the taper because I'm at this point, you're quite tired. You're like, oh, it's going to be nice, like having that permission to start easing off. But then when I get into it, I do question whether I'm taking the right approach for me, because I think there's kind of a standard, okay, you should be tapering 2 to 3 weeks out, and there's like kind of a standard like list of things that are quite common. But actually, when you've got experience in doing these events lots of times, you realize that different things work for different people and a different volume, etc. So me coming from high mileage, I've kind of worked out over the years that a really long taper doesn't necessarily work for me, because it's almost like my legs start recovering so much that they don't really want to move anymore. So I have to keep the volume at a level that's right for me and the intensity still, so you can still feel like there's a little bit of tiredness in there. And then the last few days, it's like, okay, now we freshen up, and that's when I feel really energetic. So it's just getting the timing right. And so I think that's why I struggle, because you're kind of questioning, is this going to work this time? Like, how am I going to feel on race day? And you don't really know until race day how you're going to feel.
And that is so individual. And obviously your coach can help you to some degree with that. But I do think the taper and how your legs recover and what you're used to is such an individual approach, and probably something you can only really learn by doing it, and sometimes doing it the wrong way. Interesting one for your next race. So what will you do for Two Oceans?
So I think what a good tip is also practicing your taper in some smaller races as well. So I've done, over the past few months, I've done some like 5-mile races and just random distances, and actually just like trying to practice what your approach will be for those A races and seeing if it works. So that's really helped me know what works. So for Two Oceans, we're now like 2.5 weeks to go, and the week I had last week I was super tired. So going into this week, I've just taken it quite easy so far, not done any sessions yet. It's now Thursday, and going by how I feel, and I'm being conscious that I still need to get my last kind of long run in, which will be 2 weeks before the race, and then from there gradually ease down, but still keeping quite honest with the volume, and then in that final week then cutting things out. But I think also it's keeping your routine the same. So if you're used to double running, suddenly cutting out the second run can actually be quite hard, but just shortening it so you're starting to freshen up. But say you do 5 miles in the evening, starting to make it 3 from now is quite a good way of doing it, because then you're not like over recovering yet.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point for the mental side of it as well, and managing that anxiety of feeling like you're not doing enough. A lot of that can be mitigated by just keeping in the same routine, whether it's shorter running, or I sometimes just go for a walk at the time that I would be running, and then that just calms my urge to get out and do something at that time.
Yeah, because you do suddenly have way more time on your hands as well. If you're spending however long each day running, you're like, what do I do at this time? So yeah, like you say, if you can just replace it with a walk or some other activity that's not going to tire you out, then that's going to be helpful mentally.
Well, should we get some tips from the experts?
Let's do it.
James and Pete, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. Our first question for you both is, what is your why for running? And James, we'll kick off with you.
My why for running, I've literally my whole life pretty much been a runner, so it's come very natural to me. But I just really kind of like, it suits my personality. But it's created like a real structure to my life in terms of, when I went through education, in terms of, training and finding a kind of routine to life. It's taken me around the world. I've met amazing people, but it's a real kind of like enjoyment of getting out and seeing the sounds and sights and that kind of personal achievement. But now, the why now is kind of almost passing that on to other people through coaching and through kind of like supporting people and almost trying to get people to almost think about their why as well. So I'm very lucky when I wake up in the morning. I don't have to worry too much about motivation to get out and run, and that's something that I still feel kind of privileged and lucky to have that. I'm hoping the running bug doesn't ever wear off.
And it must be so rewarding to see other people developing that as well. Running is hard at the start and it's not comfortable, but when, as you say, when you get into it and start progressing a bit, then you find the joy for it and find that kind of easy flow state that just makes you feel so good. So it must be very rewarding seeing that in other people as they develop.
It is, my day still doesn't feel complete unless I've got a run in. I still feel that we're in that day, even if it's a super busy day, I need to get a run in. Nowadays, I try and get a run in as early as possible. And it's trying to kind of get people to get past some of the barriers and also, for people that are either new to running or have had issues or injuries or illness, it's getting them, over those little obstacles. And when people sometimes talk about, having not bitten by the running bug, and then you kind of know that if you can keep them kind of, ticking along, that they will get bitten by it. And there's nothing better than seeing someone, that really starts to, see the positives of running. And again, I've been lucky to see it really shape people's lives where, they either came into a university program or a running program as they would class themselves as a non-runner. And I'm seeing them sort of now in my age now, 20 odd years later, some of them of my early cohort that are still running. And many of them have gone on to become coaches as well. So it's almost passing on that love and enjoyment of running that I've passed on hopefully to other people, but then to see them passing it on to even more people. So I mean that's really special as well.
Yeah, it's so rewarding. And I think what you're saying about structure as well, I completely get that running just gives me a structure to my day. And I think, when people are starting out running, time can be a real barrier that they can't fit it in, but actually just finding that routine, realizing you can squeeze in this run here and there, and then I think it starts flipping on the other side where actually that is providing the structure and base for your day.
100%. I mean, going back to kind of structure for me when I was younger, to kind of put that kind of work in, sometimes in running, you see the success. As I said, I saw that when I was probably like 11, 12 years of age, where, actually, you're in a race, you're on your own. And the same with like exams and stuff like that. I suddenly realized actually, you have to apply yourself. But there was something about the individual nature of it that, the hard work you put in, and also the failures and things when they don't go to plan, and when I kind of enjoy that kind of clawing my way back, and I enjoy that even more now, because when I coach athletes that things don't go to plan, I wish it did. I wish every athlete that they never get injured, that every race goes exactly how we plan. And often there's some really big kind of fall off cliffs that we have to claw our way back. But when you get an athlete back to where they want to be, or even better beyond that point, there's nothing more special than that. So and people realizing that they can achieve things that they didn't even think were possible. So that as a kind of coach now, and just them seeing that such a positive kind of energy from running, and I said that structure and enjoyment that you get from just getting out and just doing an easy 5 miles, there's such a buzz from that.
What about you, Pete? What's your why for running?
Yeah, firstly, I love this question because this is something I always ask people. Like, there's no point going running if you don't have a good why, because you're not going to enjoy it and keep to it. For me, I've seen kind of running be taken away from my mum instantly during a race. So for me, it's running for those who can't. I know that one day I'm not going to be able to run. So I feel ridiculously fortunate that I can go and put my shoes on and go and run down the Thames after this, for example, because there's lots of people who can't do that. And that's the same with our refugee run club, for example. They can't go for a run because they can't afford the trainers. So for me, I just feel very lucky to be able to run. So I think my why is to be able to run for those who can't.
That's such a lovely perspective to have. And that links on quite nicely into how Coopah started. So Coopah has a very kind of inspirational story behind why it was created. Are you able to share a bit about that and what motivated you to start Coopah?
Yeah, so what motivated me to start Coopah was my mum passing away, and then also shortly after my best friend. So I actually ran a marathon, Berlin Marathon, with my mum. She was way better than me, and my best mate, and they both passed away shortly after. So anyone listening, don't run a marathon with me because I'm clearly bad luck. But basically, my mum was a really good runner. She was a Boston qualifier. She wasn't at the level of any of you three, but she was a good runner. And she used to say to me, Pete, if you actually started training, you could probably be a good runner too. And I kept going, I'd love to do a sub 4 hour marathon one day. And she was like, Pete, you can't just turn up on the start line and run a marathon and expect to do sub 4. So when she passed away, and then my best friend shortly after, I actually suffered from depression, anxiety and OCD, and it got to the point where I was going to take my own life, and came back from therapy and was just like, right, I'm going to give running a go, like see what happens. And I ran for about an hour, not very far at all, because most of the time I was stopping, but all of a sudden I was connected to Mum and Will, and I was like, I think I've found my therapy. And running therapy, whether it is or not, people have different agreements. My dream is to get Coopah prescribed by the NHS. That's what I want to happen. But I was like, shit, I need to spread the message here. Like, I need to tell people that you don't have to be going to the Olympics to say you're a runner. Actually, you could just run to the end of the street and you are able to run, and that might be all you need to help your life. And for me, it's just about movement. So set about thinking, how can I spread this message? So moved away to Hong Kong, which I feel like I was probably just running away from my London life. Started a run club there and 74 people turned up, and then they started entering events and said to me, I can't train, like I keep giving up running. And I was like, you haven't got the runner's like bug, like James mentioned earlier. And I started saying, how are you training? And they're like, I've tried this PDF, but it doesn't work for me. I've tried a private coach. I don't want to spend the money on them because actually running isn't my whole life. And I was like, shit, if these people are giving up running, that could add to the mental health crisis. So I was like, we need to do something about this. So set about looking into the numbers of how many people give up running after 30 days, which was like 58%. And I was like, we need to do something about this. And then that was when I found Dan, my co-founder, who's the techie, and he had exactly the same vision. And we were like, if we can make people make running a habit, then we're going to make the world a better place. And that was the start of Coopah as you see it today.
We had Sabrina Pace-Humphreys on the podcast a while ago, and your story reminds me of hers a little bit, in that she was in the depths of depression. She was struggling with alcohol abuse, and she was going to a doctor and being prescribed various cocktail of drugs. And then they said, why don't you try doing some exercise, get out the house? And she had young children as well, so it was very much kind of stuck in the house looking after these children, and got out for a run. And she said it was the hardest thing she'd ever done. And she ran probably a mile and felt like she was about to die, but she got back in to the house and she was like, this is transformative. And she hasn't stopped since. And she's built this incredible community. Again, a lot of it is based on her discovery of the mental health benefits of running and just how it transformed her life, and how then the community around it can add to that. So with Coopah, it's so refreshing to hear that this plan is, that element of mental health is brought into it. With the app, does that part of training come into it around the mindset and the mental health gains around running? Do you incorporate that into the Coopah app?
Yeah, there's a lot of the things that we will do in the back end that you don't see, which we're constantly like, if I'm in the meeting, I'm like, no, but what about if you do miss this set? Like, that could really hurt you. Like, that could make you depressed. Like, because running is a numbers game at the end of the day. Like, if you're told to run 5 miles easy and you end up running 4 miles, it's how do you do that? So one of the big things we've got is a chat with coach function, and we don't want to make that AI. We want to make sure that that is real coaches who are all qualified behind the scenes. So no matter who you're speaking to, it is a real person. And one of the things that we do is quite often, especially around this season with marathon season coming up, I will put out a message to the team and say, if you think anyone, it doesn't seem themselves, they're a bit anxious, that maybe, you know, any sort of trigger moments on the way they send in a message, please just assign them to me and I'll jump on a call with them. So that's one of the big things we do. Like, we have a link and I'll give them 15 minutes to just chat through, remind them of their why, like remind them they're not going to win the marathon or the 5K. There's a reason why they're doing this. And that always just makes them feel a bit more like, okay, yeah, let's re-go and keep going and running. So that's a big part of it, is that personal side of it.
I really value having a coach. I think it's so essential for my performance. But I think one of the key things is I could set myself a training plan, but having someone holding me accountable and also just reminding me when I can take a step back and almost giving me the permission to do it. Because sometimes, like you said, say I'm aiming to go out for a 5-mile run, but actually I'm not feeling great and I go for 4 miles. It's almost then just saying, oh, I did this because I felt tired, and then having my coach say, well, that was the right thing to do. You're like, okay, well, that was fine. It wasn't me failing at what I was planning to do. It was actually, that was the right thing to do. So I think, you know, having someone at the end of the line just to voice how you're feeling and just bounce your training ideas off of is just really helpful, just for your confidence as well in your training, that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that most of our runners are like new to running, or they're trying to get better. So for them it is, oh, I didn't tick every single rep off today, I'm going to fail, I'm a failure. And it's like, no, you're not. Like, even the best in the game might not manage everything, and if you listen to your body, if you carried on, you might have got injured, and sometimes that's all they need to hear. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
We've said a lot on this podcast with Aidan, the physio, and also a few athletes. Consistency is key. And actually, if you can get 70 to 80% of your sessions done at a decent level, that's great. You'd much rather do that than struggle through battle trying to hit everything and then beating yourself up and then getting injured. I think it's so important to actually have someone keeping you in check with that and reminding you of that fact. But what about a structured training plan as well? Because that's the other really big element that Coopah provides, especially as you're the official training app for the London Marathon, which is incredible. I suppose with a lot of people targeting, it might be their first marathon, or maybe they're trying to get a PB, or just running it for an incredible cause, which does inevitably put pressure on to do well. How important is having that structure and a plan for the entire block?
Yeah, I think it's super important because you want to be able to follow something and look back and go, I've hit 80% of my sessions. And we actually offer a beat your goal guarantee. So if you hit 80% or more of your sessions and you don't run your goal, we'll give you a full refund. And that's because we believe in the consistency. It's very much like, you can't just go and do every long run and miss everything else and think you're going to get a PB. Like I said about me just turning up on the start line at Billing going, why can't I get this 4 hours? Like my mate did it. So I think having a structured plan is key, but also a structured plan that works for you. So one of the things with the app is we don't just do a set 16-week block, a 12-week block. If you want to get into the London Marathon, say 6 months out, and you want to start your training, we'll suggest what's best for you to do. So if you are someone running for a cause, my partner's that she's running for her dad at the moment and she's never ran before. So for her, the plan told her to start your marathon training now and have a 6-month block. And James is much better to talk about this than me. But then there might be other people who are like us, and we might actually be better to go and do a 10K block for the next 8 weeks and then move on to a London plan. So it's about getting the right amount of time for your structured plan and also not getting bored, because if you just only focus on London Marathon for 6 months, you're probably going to get bored because you're not going and experience like an event experience. So we also push people to do other events as well, like go and try a 10K race, go and try a half marathon, because otherwise you're going to get bored. But yeah, the structure is really important because that's how you get that consistency. And everything we do at Coopah, linking back to the mental health side, is we want to make training a habit, because if you can make training a habit, you're going to get out of bed and go for your run, because like James says, it becomes part of your life. So it's all about making that structure turn into a habit and not like I have to go for a run, but I want to go for a run.
How does that personal element come in with the app? So say I had London Marathon in 6 months and I just downloaded a standard plan off Google that would say this is going to get me to London Marathon, but obviously that's not catered for me personally. So how does it differ with Coopah as an app in terms of treating everyone as an individual?
Yeah, so we ask you a range of questions at the start. Not too many, because people will probably drop off, and Dan would kill me if I said the churns and stuff. But yeah, that's one of the big things, is asking questions to you before. And we work with James and Jordan, the coaches, on what are the right questions to ask. So, how far have you ran in the last 4 weeks? Have you ran a marathon before? If you have, what's your time? If you haven't, that's fine. Like, is it your first 5K ever? And then once we've got all of those questions, that goes into kind of our machine learning back end. That will then come up and go, this is the right kind of plan for you. And then it will give you, like, say, a 6-month plan. And the first run might be walk 10 minutes, run 10 minutes, walk 10 minutes. So you've moved for 30 minutes, but you've only actually ran for 10 minutes. And we often get a message going, how am I going to run 26.2 miles in 6 months? And we're like, just trust the process and you're going to get there.
What's the part of the plan that people struggle with most?
Definitely the peak weeks. So we see our chat with coach function get very, very busy. If we take London, which is April the 21st, we see that get very busy about 6 to 3 weeks out. So people very much going, I've just had my long run, or my long run's coming up. I'm really tired. I've already ran X amount of Ks this week. How am I meant to run this long run? Then my long run didn't go to plan. And it's like, don't worry, you've already ran, say, 50K this week, 70K, like it's all bundled up. So that's definitely the part of the plan where people see a big spike and they go, okay, this is really hard now. Like, I've been training for 3 months, 6 months. I'm really tired and I've still got another month to go until event day. And I think also that anxiety is coming up. They need to raise money potentially. They've got the pressure because maybe they've raised from 100 people and everyone now knows they're doing it. People in the work office are asking them about it. So I think that is like the big thing, like that first long run through to probably the taper starting. And the taper will, I expect, get a lot of questions as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can probably relate to that, because once you've done so many weeks on top of each other, the tiredness does kick in. I've personally experienced that in the last couple of weeks for me in my training. So I think it's good to know that everyone is the same with that, and also reminding yourself, like you said, that you've done all these great weeks of training. You know, they're not wasted just because you're a bit tired now. It's okay. The taper's coming up. You're going to be fresh on race day. So you're not getting unfit just because you're tired.
Definitely. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? You look at your plan and you're like, I am so tired. How am I going to go and run this? But everyone else is going through the same thing. And that's what's good about the community, is they can share that and be like, yeah, I'm also tired, but let's do this together and win early there.
I think that's so important, because it's very easy to slip into the mindset of thinking everyone else is doing it perfectly and it's all going swimmingly well and everyone's ticking off every session and no one feels tired. And that's just not the case. As you say, everyone goes through the same things. Everyone has shocking sessions where you just get out there and your legs are gone and there's nothing you can do about it, and you have tired weeks, and that is all part of marathon training. If it was easy, everyone would do it.
Definitely. James gets a lot of messages from me.
I do actually. Yeah, especially with Boston on the horizon. Yeah.
So we all know how important good nutrition is to fuel our running performance. But one thing I get asked about a lot is how to fuel training sessions, because gels can be quite hard to tolerate and quite hard to get used to.
Especially as a lot of sports nutrition is heavily processed with artificial ingredients, not always that great on the stomach. But recently we've been trying Velo Forte and loving it, haven't we?
We have. Velo Forte is a natural way to fuel your performance. Their gut healthy bars, recovery shakes and performance enhancing gels and chews are all made from real natural ingredients with no junk and additives, easier on your stomach and overall better for you.
And they taste delicious too. Chef made recipes and so many incredible flavours. There's something for everyone, for every activity.
Favourite product?
My favourite product is the energy bar. Really good straight after a session or on the go.
I love this one. This is the recovery shake, and they just taste so delicious after a hard training session.
Thanks to Velo Forte for supporting this podcast. Head to veloforte.com and get 30% off by entering the code 5miles at checkout. That's the number 5 and the word miles. Well, it's good to know, even, someone like Rose who's run 2:23 for a marathon, it's good to know like that end of the scale as well. Athletes are still feeling that way. So it's no matter, how good you are, it's all the same. It's all relative.
Yeah, and I love that. I love hearing like you can run a 2:23 and you feel the same as someone who's like going to do an 8-hour marathon and be completely back of the pack. Like that's what's beautiful about running. Like everybody goes through the same things. It's a little bit different in terms of the pace you're going and stuff, but actually mentally our body is still breaking down the same barriers.
I always say, relative. That's the line I always use. It's all relative, and like you try and get it through. You said people look at runners and go, that's not me. That's not me. But everyone's feeling exactly the same. It's just a slightly different duration of time for how long people feel like it sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. I've had so many weeks where in my Chicago build-up, I'd call my coach Alistair and be like, oh God, that session was so hard. I could barely hit the paces, and then dropped off. And he was like, well, yeah, that's because you had a massive weekend. I was expecting you to feel like that. And as soon as he says this, I'm like, oh, it's fine.
Yeah.
But before I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't do this. I'm so far off. But it's just having that outside perspective sometimes, saying, no, you're meant to feel tired. It's part of the training.
It's that comfort blanket as well, isn't it? Of knowing that you've got someone to talk to. And that's also what we're trying to bring in with the app, is that no matter what level you are, you can talk to someone and say, why couldn't I hit those sessions? And just being able to say, it's fine, like you are tired, continue.
And what about motivation? So what are the key tips for just sticking at running or a marathon plan? Because I think running's such a big part of our lives, so we do feel motivated, but there are days where we can struggle with motivation and it's just hard to get out of the door. So what would you say to someone that, is struggling with that and they just feel like they just don't want to do their long run, they don't want to do their session? How do they get that first step to ticking it off? For
me, it's think about how you're going to feel after the session. And I say that, and yesterday I had a really bad run and I got back and I was like, running's rubbish, isn't it? But I always try and think about how you feel after that session. So don't think about what you've got in the session, but think about that buzz, those endorphins after. And if at the beginning of your plan, if you're brand new to running, write them down and then follow that through the weeks and the months. And then if you are struggling when you get to this period of, say, marathon training, 10K training, whatever it is, go back and remind yourself and then put those shoes on, go out the door. One of the things I do, like especially now, is I pack my bag. So like coming here, I've packed my bag. So I have to run to the office, because if I don't, I see that I failed today. So I always try and be prepared the night before. So if I don't go for a run, I've had to walk over my running clothes, for example, to go out the door to work. And I'm like, I didn't do that. So always being prepared as well.
That's such a good tip. Just making it easy for yourself to removing the barriers to getting out the door is such a crucial part of it. So, James, we're going to get some top tips from you. We are 2 weeks out from London Marathon, which I know a lot of our listeners will be preparing for. So we're going to get some top marathon training tips from you. But to kick things off, if someone is thinking about doing a marathon, perhaps inspired by London, how do you get started?
So how you get started? Well, obviously pick the marathon you're going to run. That's probably the first one. And obviously, many people going for the ballot for London, and obviously the charity opportunities for London as well. But the great thing is, and that's one of the super things about running, is there's marathons everywhere, and it's become very kind of you're traveling to Boston, Pete, and travel far and wide, so you can pick somewhere where you want to run a marathon, and there's so many great cities. Pick somewhere that's going to inspire you, and if it's part of a holiday or part of a place or destination you've never been before, what have been wanted to go. So pick that marathon, and then it's probably for most runners it's or non-runners as well, because there's going to be people that choose to run a marathon that have never run a marathon and have never even run before. So it's probably working out where you're at, and that's kind of where your start point is, that first point in the journey. The end point's obviously the marathon. So from wherever you were starting, some are people that are running 3, 4, 5 times a week, but maybe with no kind of structure, and so that's probably working out. That first point is where you're at, and then that timeline. How much time have you got? If you've got the luxury of, for some people, 6 months, that's great, because you've got if you're starting from pretty much scratch, you've got loads of time to build up. We know in the reality of it that people don't tend to have sometimes 6 months. Sometimes it's much less than that. So, and that's where at Coopah we cater for those different timelines, and also the different kind of pressures on people's lives. One of the great things with the app is you can put in the day of the weeks that are more functional to you, because obviously people work shift patterns. Traditional, we always talk about the long run on a Sunday. That isn't for everyone. Not everyone has a Sunday for their long run. It might be that's when they're looking after their children, or when they have to work most at weekends. So it's kind of structuring it around people's lives, and so it's kind of find that structure, which obviously we love to help people with. It's knowing where your goal is, so you've got that nice that goal in mind. And as Pete says, there's so many reasons why for getting out there. As I've said, it could be location, could be obviously for a lot of people it's charity, could be just that personal achievement of completing a marathon. And going back to the kind of hardness of training, it gets tough, because the marathons are still tough. There's I don't think anyone has run a marathon and gone, that was super easy, brilliant. But that's why when you do achieve it, and when you do get over that line, that it's so worthwhile. So there's so many so many different parts to it. But I think first off, it's pick that marathon, and be inspired by it.
If you have the freedom of choice of which marathon you're going to choose, and you are starting from scratch,
yes, would
you recommend having at least 6 months, so that you can firstly aim for a 5k, then build to a 10k, etc.? What would you recommend?
In an absolutely ideal world, it's lovely to do it in a kind of stepped approach. So so if you did have that 6 months out, and obviously people being inspired by London, then you might even have 12 months, so you've got lots of time, but obviously you don't know you get into London till a little bit later, or other marathon windows don't open till a little bit later as well. So so you kind of don't always have a massive build up. But if you did have 6 months, that things like Park Run are so great as a kind of start point for building up towards, and it doesn't have to be just, that's the other thing, is it doesn't have to be running continuously for any distance. Run walk is still such a huge part of the community that we're in. We don't want to ostracize people that can't run continuously. It's still about completing the distance. But I always think having a goal in terms of whether that's to complete a 5k, whether that's to complete a 10k, and obviously then we're going up in distance, or for some it might be time based, that they start to think that they've got a time based, and people sometimes pluck times like 4 hours out of the blue. But we need to work out how whether that is logical, that is achievable, and actually starting with something like a 5k is a good kind of start point to then progressing. And also people need, if you say you've got a goal in 6 months time, it's like anything in life, if that is just something in 6 months time, you need smaller bite-sized chunks, and also to realize that you can achieve something and it's not going to be this linear line, and training's not just going to keep continually getting increasing the whole time. That there's going to be points where you're going to achieve something, so that might be your first 5k, and then you might have a week off, you might have a few days off to reset and enjoy that, and then it might be then aiming towards a 10k or similar, and you kind of that stepped approach where in training we're looking at kind of like you have to overload a little bit, so you have to do a little bit more. So that might be in the week. So if you're definitely running the 5k, you're definitely in a week running more than 5 kilometers of running. And then at some point you have to really adapt, which is, I don't think any runner runs to get worse, or we shouldn't be running to get worse. So we're always looking to improve, whether that's ourselves or time or to make it feel easier. But we only do that through the right amount of recovery, but also making sure training is specific to that person and what they're trying to do. And again, that's where we kind of come in to kind of help create that structure, make it specific to the person, but have those bite-sized goals to keep that motivation. Because if you don't have that kind of vision of where you're going, then 6 months is a long time, and what was it, 57% you say that lose it after 30 days? We're so conscious that we don't want to lose one person, let alone 57%.
I think breaking it down into and having mini goals along the way is such a good tip, because I know so many people who think, oh, the race is 6 months away, I don't need to start yet, and intend to, and then it gets to Christmas and then they think, well, it's Christmas, I'm going to start in January, and then suddenly it creeps up. And I think it can also just seem like a massive mountain if you don't have those chunks along the way. Even for me, when I start out a marathon block, the target seems really high up and you just can't think about it like that. You've got to think about the process rather than the end goal to stop it feeling so overwhelming. So I think, having little races in between is a great tip there. What are the biggest mistakes you see people making?
Oh, there's so many, and it's so easy, and we all make them ourselves still, and we kind of, that's part of my job, is to kind of pass it on to people, and often it's been learned through the rough end of experience, and obviously when you're trying to push for something, you're doing more sometimes than you've ever done before. So one of the biggest mistakes is not listening to your body sometimes, and and obviously we prescribe training and recommend training, but you still have to listen to your body and make smart decisions sometimes. And as you said, Steph, in terms of like, sometimes it might be that 4 mile run, not that 5 mile run. It might be kind of like just backing off sometimes, and also we kind of do prescribe paces sometimes, and it often it's not maybe sometimes getting too caught up in, if you don't hit those paces, that it's a disaster. And so I think sometimes it's just being kind to yourself is one of the biggest things as a runner. It's not kind of being doom and gloom. I mean, if you're still out there, or you've got 80% of that training in, that don't panic. And I think one of the biggest mistakes people make, especially, we talked about this 2-week window now, is runners do not panic. This is not the window to go and do something to prove to yourself that you are fit enough to run the marathon. If you do that, you might leave it in training. You might run the risk of, injuring yourself, putting yourself in a kind of fatigue bubble that you don't want to be in. You want to ease off now. What is done is done. You've got to be in that taper part now where you're easing in. So just don't feel you've got to go out and prove yourself. And I've seen it before where people have had structured training plans, and I won't name the runner, but they are a Olympian, they've got a world medal, and they were doing a half marathon. I think it's part of a charity run, and they'd had a bit of a niggle 2 weeks out of or I think it was even the week before a half marathon. They went, okay, I need to run a half marathon just to know that I can run the half marathon next week. And they went around a half marathon. The last mile, their calf pinged, and they then couldn't run this big charity race the next week. So even at the highest end, someone that is super experienced, proving to themselves they can run a half marathon before running a half marathon. Whereas if they'd have just left it and gone, you know what, I've got another week to recover, another week for my body to look after itself. I'll look after the small parts, and get to race day as healthy and happy as possible. They would have completed it on race day, but they were sat on the sidelines watching their friends and colleagues complete it. Don't be that person. So trust what's in the system, what's been before, and your best bet in the last couple of weeks is just get that absorb and get that good work going into your system.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to think that more is more. I've definitely had it in marathon builds where 3 weeks out you've got a massive session, you feel like you've absolutely nailed it, but you've put everything into that, where that's basically your marathon done.
Yeah.
3 weeks later, you're like, well, I peaked 3 weeks ago. So
exactly. And the other thing is not turn off social media, but do not watch what other people are doing, because again, everyone is doing something, slightly different, or you read something or see something and you're like, panic. Trust what you're doing. And as I said, don't listen to all the noises around you. So just have faith and trust in what you're doing, and kind of enjoy the work that's gone in, because you can't add too much to it in the last couple of weeks. The only thing you can do is take away from it. And again, there's nothing worse than having done a really good block of training, but you have doubts. We all have doubts in those last couple of weeks, but you then do something that is detrimental to your race day, and then you just be kicking yourself. And if you've gone through that whole process, and also you're running for charity, and your friends and family and colleagues at work know you're running, there'd be nothing worse than saying the day before that you can't run because you pulled your calf
in the taper.
Taper.
Which brings nicely on to some taper tips.
Yes.
Which I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be very keen to hear, because we've both been there in the taper, and it's not always the easiest part. You might think it's training's done, now it's time to just enjoy it, but there's a lot of anxiety and stress that goes into those last 2 weeks.
Oh, it is just anxiety and stress, isn't it? Yeah.
Pretty much. First question, how long should the taper be? When should people start tapering?
Well, tapering is predominantly 2 or 3 weeks out. So, and we talk about what tapering is. You're, basically decreasing the volume. So, those highest weeks of volume where you were doing your longest runs, you were doing your most volume in the week, that volume has to decrease. We're going to that period where you're going to recover. You're going to feel kind of like, the work then gets absorbed, because that training run and those training weeks, you don't get that fitness straight away. It takes time for it to be absorbed into the system. So yes, you need that time. In terms of frequency, so the number of times you run might stay the same, but obviously the time on feet will just decrease, because we all love routine. If you just cut out running altogether, then we'd all literally like lose our minds that we couldn't run. So actually I always say to people, enjoy this period now where you can get out and just kind of enjoy this, try and enjoy it. But it's saying to people, you say as a coach, enjoy it, but you have to say to them, but you're going to start to feel a bit kind of like anxious, you're going to start to feel a bit itchy, start feeling like, I'm not doing as much as I did a couple of weeks ago, I'm losing fitness. And that's the classic of I'm losing fitness. Or you have maybe even one less run in a week, and it's like, oh, I've lost so much fitness. No, it's the complete opposite. You are gaining fitness, and that bit of anxiety and that kind of, it's almost like a kind of battery charging itself. You need that, and when the butterflies are kicking in a bit already, and you're maybe 10 days out, that's good, because that's the system getting ready, for the flights. There's a fight and flight mode, isn't there, that we have, and that's what you want on race day. So it's really important. And within that kind of taper, there might be not intensity that kind of takes it out of you, but you might have a few sessions that spin your legs a little bit, so you kind of like get moving. And now we're into springtime. I had a bit of sun this morning, and it starts to feel, you can smell a little bit of kind of different kind of air, that we're ready for it's springtime, marathon time. So you might get the legs moving a little bit, but it's all about prepping the self ready for race day. And whatever you do, you're getting the body primed. You're not trying to take anything away. So any session should be controlled. Everything should be with the mind on the race. If there's any kind of niggles or any kind of like issues, then we always say to people that just back off, and don't this is the time now to add more rest and recovery in, because again, if that's one of our absolute pillars of training is rest and recovery, then let's put it even more so into the next couple of weeks. But I think going back to that point that we all 223 marathon runners feel that that they're going to be feeling anxious, so it's totally normal. So but use that energy as a positive.
And then you mentioned people feeling like they've got niggles. I think that's quite common as well. They call it paranoia, where you start feeling things where actually it's kind of understanding the difference between what might be an issue and what's just in your head, because I think you're hyper aware of, I'm meant to be feeling really fresh during this period, but actually like you've still got things going on, you're repairing. So you start picking up on little sensations that you probably wouldn't feel when you're in the deep end of marathon training.
I had that this year for Snowdonia Marathon, where the Monday before, I can't remember what it was, because it's so funny, because at the time it was the biggest thing in the world, because I can't remember if it was my lower back or hamstring or something, but I literally got up from my office at work and it felt like it was broken. and I was like, oh my God, I'm running a marathon on Saturday. I can't believe this is so unfair. And I think, I remember running and feeling it, thinking, this is it. I've got like, I don't know, stress fracture, or start Googling everything. And then a couple of days later, it's gone. And then race day goes. And I remember thinking, I couldn't even remember what it was. And I can't remember now what it was. But at the time it was, and if someone had said, do you want to go to A&E? I'd have gone straight away. And if someone said, right, you're not racing on Saturday, I probably would have gone, okay. Yeah, because it just feels, but I think the body's so, and the mind are so connected, and almost like everything. Yeah, so I had the classic case of paranoia, definitely.
I think it's just taking comfort in the fact that you will not feel that on race day.
Yeah.
As well. There are always so many things that you think, oh, this is going to had little niggles in the build up or in the taper. These imaginary things come in, you do not feel them on race day.
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of like it's working out what are injuries and what are niggles, or what are things where things are tired and you're gonna I wake up every day and there's probably not a day that goes past where suddenly it doesn't ache a little bit, especially when you get a little bit older. So, but yeah, it's working out what's an okay kind of aches and pains, which are kind of normal, whereas actually if something is starting to develop into an injury, but hopefully not in that 2 weeks. Hopefully it's just a little bit of kind of, paranoia kicking in. Don't Google worst case scenarios because it tells you the worst thing in the world and your race and life are over. So yeah, so just know that that's kind of normal. Maybe there's a few little twinges, but yeah, it'll be okay.
What about managing the anxiety? What do you tell your athletes for that?
Yeah, so one of the tips is hopefully people have kept like a training log, and I really think that having a training diary, and obviously whether it's online or whether it's looking for your Coopah previous runs, or I'm still old school, I still write things down in a diary. I think that's a really nice thing to look back on what you've done, and if we talk about those people that have started from literally scratch, wow, what a journey that is, and where they've come from, and circling, and it doesn't have to be races people have done in the interim between that. Could have been distances people have completed and runs that maybe circling or red pen on real runs where you didn't want to run, you found it tough but you got it done. And so those are key kind of like moments in your journey towards that race. So, and you take real comfort from that. So that anxiety is normal, 100%, but give yourself a little bit of credit for what you've done to get there. And even if it's not quite, you didn't run quite as far in training as the plan said you were going to, even if you've just slightly under that, you're still prepared. You're still way more prepared than where you were at the start. And then the other anxiety thing is we always go back to the whys of why you're going to be out there. So again, that anxiety is good because we need to, and that it goes back to the completion of a marathon is still amazing. So to fear it a little bit is actually smart, because if you go into it like, this is going to be easy, I'm just going to run 26 miles and I'm just going to cruise around, it doesn't work like that. You need to respect it. And so again, think about the whys you're going to be out there. So think about the anxiety in terms of like, well, if I'm going to be worried or nervous at certain points, that why I'm out there. And if it is running for someone you've lost, then you're going to think about those at key moments. Might be key training sessions you think about, right, at 15 kilometers, I'm going to think about this run or this training session. So you kind of break down and give yourself some kind of like, some boost along the way. But it comes back to, again, just hopefully coaches and other runners in their groups, the anxiety that isn't seen as like there's any stigma to it, that it's normal and it's part of this kind of journey that you're on, and everyone's going to feel it. Yeah. But it's actually, I always think it makes it even more worthwhile when you come through that and come out the other end, because when you do, beat the challenge and you kind of like, you control, what you can control. That's a pretty amazing thing, I think.
I think just accepting and understanding that the taper is just a lot of mind games and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And then what about race day itself? So what are your top tips for just getting the most out of yourself on the race day? You already said, breaking it down into different sections of what you might think about at certain points, but what else can you do?
Yeah, so if people haven't done this already, and I would have thought that the listeners have, maybe a medium run maybe in their taper, so it wouldn't be one of their longest runs, hopefully not. That maybe run that at race time. Again, it doesn't have to be the day, it doesn't have to be a Sunday, it could be whatever day, think about the race start time, and then think about maybe obviously what you're going to be having for breakfast. Think about obviously not just the what you're fueling with, your hydration, then that window going into the day before as well, so what you're going to be eating. If you're traveling, where and how you're going to be eating something similar, and it's controlling the things you can control again, and it's thinking about obviously the shoes you're going to be wearing, it's going to be the kit you're going to be wearing, might even be if you're traveling in, so the travel, so you start to work out, so it's not just on the day you're waking up and like, how am I going to get to the start line? It's you've worked out all these little things, but also getting used to running at race times, a nice one as well, just for going through that routine. And my best advice to people is don't try anything on race day that you haven't tried and tested before. Always heard, the examples of, Paula and her porridge. There was a big spike in porridge eaters for marathon running. But if you don't normally have porridge, race day, just because they have that at the race hotel, and you're thinking, I read once that someone had porridge. Oh, it's Paula. It might not go to plan. If you're not a normal double espresso person, then race day is not that time to suddenly try. I've heard it and people have done it where that's the first time I've ever had double espresso. You're going to feel it. But if that's not what you're used to doing, and the same goes for gels as well, obviously carrying your gels, but the gels that you're used to as well. And so everything you can kind of control, and so you just take away some of the risk elements and the unknowns. And even, as I said, that pre-race meal the night before, that's something that you're used to, that it sits well in your stomach, gives you enough energy, that you just don't want any additional issues. Running the marathon is hard enough without having other problems on top of that. So yeah, control it. And as I said, even making sure you know where to park and you know all the information in regards to baggage drop off and all those little things. Don't rush on race day. I always say to people that you are yourself looking after just you. There are 40,000 odd people, and also their entourage as well. You're not going to be the only person queuing for that toilet at the race start. So don't get there with just the minimal time.
That is so stressful.
To go. Get there with loads of time. You've done all this preparation for it. Even if you get there and you've got that time to settle, and you get time to go to the toilet early, time to locate baggage, do that, because don't be that person that's running in, you see it, and they're flustered, heart rate's going through the roof, they don't know where to go, and it's all a big panic. They got up late, so they had a late breakfast, and it's all going wrong before they've even gotten to the start line. So yeah, buy yourself lots of time and make that bit as enjoyable. It won't be enjoyable because you'll be super nervous and stressed and everything's going on, but you make it less stressful.
That's great. And I think another good nutrition one is researching which brand of nutrition that
Yes.
marathon has on the course, because
Yes.
if you're planning to take if it's a Lucozade, a Gatorade, whatever, maybe practice with that in training as well.
Yeah, and the same with gels as well. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Find out what their gel station is
Yeah.
as well, which is a big one. Or if you want to, carry your own gels, again, just controls, what you're used to digesting, because everyone's slightly different. And again, the body loves routine, the mind loves routine, so try and have a routine for race day. And the only other thing I would say to people is, and now the taper's a good time to mentally prepare as well. So you're running like we all are later today, where you're running and there's no one clapping you, there's no big noise of cannons and balloons at the start. So mentally, and maybe even watch last year's race start and visualize what it's going to be like to go over the start line, and also what you're going to feel like. So because you don't want to be overwhelmed at that moment. You want a feeling of this is amazing, but don't let it be detrimental to your kind of your own performance. So it's really good to kind of picture yourself what you're going to feel like, and especially if it is going to be quite an emotional day, it's quite nice to sort of prepare yourself for it. And in that calm that you have a little bit of in that taper period, where you may have a little bit of extra time, it's just mentally prepare yourself for what that feeling, but also then what's that going to feel like when you go through some tough parts as well. So you almost mentally prepare yourself, because running is as much a mental game as it is a physical game. So if you can prepare yourself mentally, which I'm sure you're doing and you're doing as well, in terms of this thought process, about what you're going to be feeling at various points. So you might not feel exactly like that at points, and that might be great, because it might be, I'm feeling even better than I thought I would at this point. But if something does kick in at 20 miles and you need a little reminder, this isn't the first time you've ever thought you're going to think like this. So so it's a really good time in the taper period to mentally prepare for the marathon.
That's such a good point, and that's something that I incorporated after a couple of marathons, but I found it made a huge difference. Was I actually write down, okay, if I feel this way, I get this negative thought, this is how I'm going to deal with it. And then I'm not surprised by it, but also I can get myself into a positive mindset so much quicker than trying to figure out how to deal with it in a race, which your brain just can't do because you're working hard and suffering. So that's such a good tip, and one that I've definitely found has really helped me.
Well, thank you both for all those tips and tricks, and also just sharing the story behind Coopah. I think it just sounds like an incredible app that's going to be helping so many people, and already is. So what we like to finish on is, what are your high five me moments? So they're going to be the moment where you would have just given yourself a high five, 5, a big pat on the back, your proudest moments.
Go on, Pete, you kick us off.
So if we take this training block, one of the things James kept saying to me was just get yourself in really good 5K and 10K condition. Like, you've run a few marathons last year, you can do the distance. So for me, I was just like, mentally, I hadn't gone under sub 20 in so long. And I was just like, I'm not going to start marathon training until I go sub 20. And I had kind of one last shot at it. I was like, if I don't do it there, I'll just know that I've got to go into this not mentally. So went up and ran a park run up in Yorkshire and managed to get my sub 20. So that just led me into feeling really comfortable on all my marathon plans because everything felt quite easy. So I think mentally, me getting that has made the last 12 weeks feel a lot easier than it would have if I didn't get that. And that's my moment when I always think back of when a negative thought comes in. It's like, remember when it was close to missing that sub 20, what those positive thoughts. And for me, it's always just making my mum proud. So that was my high five moment. And hopefully when you're listening to this a week later, I'll have got my PB in Boston. Fingers crossed.
Love that.
Good luck.
Yeah.
We'll be
Cheers.
cheering you on.
Cheers.
And what about you, James?
Oh, well, mine is kind of a high five. I high fived my daughter at the weekend, who's 13, and we went and did the Porthcawl Park Run, and I was first male and she was first female. And the high five was that she started running a couple of years ago, and she's had a few ups and downs where, you know, at one point, you know, she wasn't enjoying running. And as a dad, a coach, a parent of kind of like, you know, not trying to force running on someone, but you want them to enjoy it because you know how much you love it and how much they might love it. And then last kind of 6 months to a year, she's like really started, and she wanted to go and run the park run. She's badgering now me on Saturday morning saying, I want to go and run a park run. And so whereas before it'd be me going, should we go and do a park run? And she's like, no, Dad, I don't want to do that. So, you know, so, okay, that's fine. I won't mention it again now, you know. So it's seeing her love of running. And then, yeah, it's still a bit surreal seeing your own child, you know, turn around and seeing them crossing the line as first female, and then high-fiving each other, which we did on the day. And then, yeah, just seeing how much running has kind of given her confidence. And, you know, and she's only at the start of her running journey. And that kind of feeling, it said, yeah, that's really special. You know, it goes back to the beginning of, you know, the why of running, but also then when you see it passed on again, and you know, to your own children, it's like, wow, that's like, it's really special. So yeah, that's my high five. Yeah.
Oh, what a moment. And yeah, it's interesting you say about confidence, because that's something we talk about a lot in here, just the power of running to do that at any age. And I think especially with young people, having something that is so wholesome, good for you, and gives those boosts for your daughter coming first female must have been massive for her. So that is an incredible high five moment, and we would have given her a big high five too. Thanks so much for joining us today and sharing all your tips, and good luck for Boston.
Thank you so much for having us on. Really appreciate it.
Loved it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us, 5 Miles Easy.
See you next time.